I think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range of organisation.
Before Britain had fully awakened, King Charles III sat behind a closed door with a single document before him and a fountain pen held motionless in his hand. The decree was only 3 pages long, but everyone in that silent room understood what it would do. At precisely 5:42 in the morning, Charles signed his name, pushed the papers away, and gave Princess Anne complete control over the royal family's official engagements. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Silence pressed against Clarence House as the king studied the signature drying beneath his hand. His London residence had become the center of an operation tightly restricted. The private secretary and 2 constitutional advisors surrendered their phones outside, while curtains remained closed. Camilla had not been told why they were there. The decision did not adjust one diary. It shattered the system that had allowed separate royal households to protect their own influence. Charles tightened his fingers around the pen, then set it down. The emergency royal decree, a direct written order issued under the monarch's authority, transferred full control of official engagements to Anne. She could approve appearances, alter schedules, remove relatives from assignments, and decide who represented the crown. He admitted that competing offices had created disorder and a collapse of discipline. Triumph never entered his voice. Exhaustion did. He had reached the point where patience felt like surrender. Anne woke to a telephone ringing beside her bed. She listened without interrupting, then sat motionless as her brother explained what he had done. Anne understood that an official engagement meant a public duty, performed for the crown and the human cost behind each alteration. "Are you certain there is no other way?" she asked. Charles paused, then answered that every gentler option had failed. Unease deepened when the advisors opened a confidential appendix, a sealed extra section naming 3 engagements under review. None would leave it unattended, and their guarded faces suggested senior relatives could be removed first. Camilla entered the corridor as a courier received the sealed envelope. She saw her husband's signature through the open folder, but the secretary closed it before she could read the final clause. Her expression hardened. Anne dressed for London, yet a second message stopped her before departure. One royal household had discovered the decree, and its principal was demanding an immediate audience with the king. Charles had created a new center of power before sunrise, but the real shock would come when those closest to the throne discovered exactly how much authority Anne had been given over them. Princess Anne had spent a lifetime stepping forward when duty demanded it, and disappearing when applause arrived. Yet this was different. Charles had not merely asked his sister to help him, he had placed the movements, appearances, and public standing of the entire royal family under her command. As Anne's car approached London, she stared at the decree beside her and understood that every decision she made could wound someone she loved. Anne had earned authority without chasing it. For decades, she had completed exhausting schedules, entered difficult rooms, and carried out public duties without demanding praise or sympathy. An official royal engagement was a public appearance performed on behalf of the crown, and she understood that each one carried political weight, personal expectation, and the reputation of the monarchy itself. Her power came from consistency. That was precisely why the king had chosen her. The document felt heavier each time she turned a page. One clause allowed the Princess Royal to remove any family member from an assignment without seeking permission from that person's household. She read it twice. Charles wanted stability after months of disorder. William wanted to protect Catherine and the children from pressure. Camilla feared that her influence could be reduced overnight. Edward worried that years of loyal work might suddenly be measured against rules he had never helped create. Anne knew all of them. She loved all of them. Now she might have to disappoint every one of them. Charles called before the car reached St. James's Palace. His voice had lost the firmness heard at dawn. He admitted during the private conversation that he had selected his sister because she was the only person he trusted to tell him no when duty demanded it. Anne looked down at the decree, and answered that trust would not shield either of them from anger. The king said nothing for several seconds. His silence confirmed that he already expected resistance. A single paragraph near the end changed everything. The emergency arrangement appeared temporary, but a renewal provision, a clause allowing the order to be extended, gave the monarch the power to continue it indefinitely. Anne understood the truth immediately. This was not merely crisis management. It could become the monarchy's permanent chain of command. Then she found the handwritten note. Begin with the engagements already promised, but not approved. The words were brief, but their meaning was explosive. Someone had made commitments in the crown's name without final permission, forcing Charles to choose between public embarrassment and private surrender. Anne entered her palace office, removed her gloves, and placed the decree in the center of the desk. The equerry froze when she ordered every royal calendar delivered before noon. He hesitated. She repeated the instruction without raising her voice. The first schedule arrived minutes later. One ceremonial appearance had been crossed out by Charles, then quietly restored by someone close to him. Anne had accepted the burden without ceremony, but buried inside the family's crowded calendars was the decision that had finally driven Charles to declare, "Enough." The emergency decree had not been born in a single angry morning. For months, Charles had watched private promises collide with official plans. Engagements overlap, and personal loyalties weaken the discipline of the crown. But one ceremony changed frustration into action. What happened inside the royal gallery 3 nights earlier was later remembered as the moment Charles stopped asking for cooperation and began preparing to take control away from everyone. Charles had tried to restore order quietly. Separate royal households had begun negotiating appearances on their own, causing duplicated visits, conflicting announcements, and subtle battles over the most important national events. One office would promise attendance before another had confirmed its plans. Charities received mixed messages. Local organizers prepared for senior royals who were suddenly replaced. The weekly coordination meetings, private sessions designed to align every working royal's public schedule, should have prevented that confusion. Instead, family members often sent aides while protecting their own priorities, leaving the king isolated from decisions made in his name. The breaking point came during a private rehearsal in the royal gallery, the ceremonial hall used for major state occasions. Charles studied the seating plan for an approaching national service and stopped at one name. Camilla's office had restored one of her relatives to a prominent guest position, even though her husband had personally ordered the invitation withdrawn. Anne saw his face change. 2 senior aides lowered their eyes as the monarch asked his wife why his instruction had been reversed. Camilla held her ground. She told him the change had prevented needless embarrassment and insisted the matter was too small to trouble him again. Charles removed his glasses and folded the revised plan with slow precision. Anger would have been easier for everyone. What emerged instead was disappointment. He told the queen consort that the argument was no longer about one guest. His word had become negotiable inside his own household, and she had allowed it. Anne soon learned the invitation was only the beginning. A documented scheduling review showed that the same office had altered 2 future engagements and informed outside organizations before final sovereign approval. The monarch's formal permission had been granted. Camilla had not merely protected a relative. Her staff had created a private route around the king. Charles remained with his sister after the aides and his wife left. With no official buffer between them, he asked whether she would take control of every engagement if he issued a direct order. Anne did not answer immediately. Her silence told him she understood the cost. Charles later returned to his study, opened a red dispatch box, the locked case carrying the sovereign's official papers, and wrote "Emergency" across a blank instruction sheet. He called his private secretary and ordered the decree drafted before dawn. When Camilla discovered Anne had witnessed her humiliation, she decided the Princess Royal would face her directly. The ceremony had exposed the fracture, but the confrontation waiting behind the next closed door would turn an administrative crisis into a deeply personal battle between 2 royal women. Camilla did not wait for a formal explanation. By late morning, she had learned that every engagement proposed by her household now required Anne's approval. She crossed the palace corridor without her usual aids and entered the Princess Royal's office before the door could be announced. Anne remained seated, one hand resting on the decree. For several seconds neither woman spoke. Then Camilla looked at the papers and said, "You have taken my voice." Anne did not flinch. Camilla argued that her charitable work depended on relationships built over years, not names placed into empty spaces on a calendar. Placing another royal above her household would make the queen consort appear distrusted, diminished, and publicly supervised. The decree, a written command carrying the monarch's authority, would affect every working member of the family, Anne replied, not only the woman standing before her. The crown could no longer survive competing centers of influence, private promises, and appearances announced before final approval. Camilla stepped closer and accused her of accepting power she had secretly wanted for years. Anne's discipline finally cracked. She told the queen that she had never wanted control over her, William, Edward, or anyone else. She had wanted Charles to be obeyed, so neither woman would ever be forced into this room. The answer landed hard because it made the confrontation about loyalty, not ambition. Anne opened the folder and placed the disputed Royal Gallery invitation on the desk. Camilla's anger weakened into hurt. She admitted during that private exchange that she had restored the guest to protect someone she loved from public humiliation. Her opponent answered that personal protection could not come at the cost of the king's authority. Love might explain the choice, but it could not erase its consequences. The next disclosure cut deeper. Anne explained that the invitation was only one item in a confidential appendix, a restricted section containing information withheld from general circulation. 2 of Camilla's future appearances had been suspended because outside organizations received commitments Charles never approved. The Queen then noticed copies of private correspondence between her office and event organizers. Her husband had not acted on irritation alone, he had assembled evidence. Camilla reached for the decree, but Anne placed her palm over it. The chair scraped as the Queen stood. Her sister-in-law rose as well, refusing to retreat. "This is not yours to reverse. It is his decision, and now it is my duty." Camilla moved toward the door, then warned that William would never surrender control of Catherine and their children's appearances so easily. Anne barely had time to absorb the threat before her secretary entered and announced that the Prince of Wales was waiting outside. Camilla had left wounded and furious, but Anne now faced a more dangerous test, convincing the future king that even his household was no longer beyond her reach. Prince William entered the room carrying no papers and offering no ceremonial greeting. Unlike Camilla, he did not challenge the decree immediately. He closed the red door himself, took the chair opposite Anne, and studied his aunt's face. William understood the need for discipline, but he also knew what full control meant. Catherine's return, George's preparation, Charlotte's appearances, and Louis's future could now be shaped by someone outside his household. Anne allowed the silence to hold. The decree gave her executive control, the practical power to approve, alter, or cancel engagements, but the authority behind every instruction still belonged to Charles. Resisting her decisions would therefore mean challenging the king himself. William understood that danger, yet his household had guarded its independence for good reason. Catherine's well-being could not be treated like a scheduling problem, and the children's appearances carried emotional risks that no central office could fully measure. William finally spoke. Catherine would not be used to repair failures created by other households, he told his aunt. And George, Charlotte, and Louis would never become symbols moved around to satisfy institutional pressure. Anne answered that his wife would never be forced into a public appearance, but no family office could reserve major national events while leaving everyone else unable to plan. Protection mattered. So did fairness. Anne leaned forward and warned him that protection could slowly become isolation. The words struck harder than he expected, because Charles had voiced the same fear during a private father and son conversation weeks earlier. William now realized the king and his sister had discussed more than calendars. They were questioning whether the future monarch had drawn his household so tightly inward that the rest of the family could no longer function around it. Then Anne opened a confidential scheduling chart. Several major engagements had been informally held for the Wales household, preventing Edward and Sophie from confirming their own duties. William's expression changed. He had never ordered his aides to block those dates, and the trusted couple had been left waiting because his name carried greater weight. One entry stopped him completely. A reserved national ceremony listed George as a likely participant, although neither William nor Catherine had approved their son's involvement. Someone had used the young prince's name to secure prominence before speaking to his parents. William's jaw tightened as he read the line again. He placed the chart down with deliberate care and demanded the name of the official responsible. Anne refused. An internal review, a private investigation conducted within the household, was already underway, and she would not become his weapon before the evidence was complete. William chose restraint. He agreed to submit his household's full calendar, provided medical and family decisions remained private. Anne accepted, creating the first clear boundary around her new power. A secretary entered before either could speak again. Anne had cancelled a major engagement scheduled for the following afternoon, and the royal affected had learned from the host organization. William had chosen cooperation over rebellion, but Anne's first cancellation was already spreading through the family, and one royal was about to discover just how swiftly the old rules had vanished. Prince Edward was preparing notes for a major charitable reception when his private secretary entered with a face that immediately unsettled him. The event had been reassigned. No negotiation, no postponement, no warning from a relative. Only a brief instruction issued under the authority of Princess Anne. Edward read the message twice, placed his speech on the table, and asked the question echoing across every royal household. Is this how it will be now? Edward had spent years building trust with the charity behind the reception. He knew its leaders, understood its work, and had shaped his remarks around people who expected him to appear. Yet Anne's first operational review, the immediate examination of every planned royal duty, had exposed a painful conflict. A community struck by a national tragedy had requested urgent royal support on the same afternoon. Under the old system, both events would have continued, one heavily covered and the other almost ignored. She refused to let public grief become the lesser obligation. Anne reassigned the reception to Sophie and directed her brother toward the grieving families. She believed his steady manner and long experience made him the stronger choice for a solemn visit. The logic was clear, the manner of delivery was not. Learning from the host organization made Edward feel less like a trusted royal and more like a name moved across his sister's master calendar. Sophie found him alone, beside the unfinished speech. She read the instruction, then reminded her husband that Anne had not removed him from duty. She had given him the harder duty. Edward accepted the distinction, but the pain remained. He told the trusted confidant that understanding why a decision was made did not erase the humiliation of discovering it through strangers. She placed the papers beside him and said that loyalty sometimes hurt most when it was still being demanded. Anne soon discovered why the message had reached outsiders first. Her instruction had been leaked before palace communication was complete. A scheduling network, the group of officials coordinating royal appearances, should have protected the change until every affected person was told. Instead, someone had made her leadership look careless and cold. The damage spread quickly. A press account claimed Edward had been punished and pushed aside. The wording matched a private email shared among only 4 senior staff members, narrowing the source of the betrayal. Anne understood that resistance was no longer limited to wounded relatives. Someone inside the system was actively shaping the story against her. Edward called her directly. His voice remained controlled, but the hurt was unmistakable as he asked why she had not told him herself. Anne accepted responsibility, apologized without reversing the decision, and promised no royal would again learn of a change from an outsider. He agreed to visit the grieving community, proving the system could work only if authority remembered human dignity. That night, Charles arrived to meet Anne without advisors, carrying the leaked email in his hand. The first cancellation had bruised Edward, but strengthened the new order. And now Charles possessed evidence that the greatest threat to Anne's authority was operating inside the palace itself. That evening, Charles entered Anne's sitting room alone. No private secretary followed him, no equerry waited beside the door, and no red box rested in his hands. For the first time since the decree was signed, they faced each other simply as brother and sister. Anne expected another instruction. Instead, Charles placed the leaked email on the table and admitted that he feared he had given her his crisis and protected himself from its pain. Anne read the message without speaking. It traced back to a senior coordinator who served several royal households and feared that central control would destroy the private alliances built behind palace doors. A coordinator was the official responsible for joining separate schedules into one workable plan. But this man had done more than arrange dates. He had helped courtiers trade access, priority, and proximity to major events without direct approval from the sovereign. The confusion had not grown by accident. Too many people benefited from keeping it alive. Anne pushed the email toward her brother. She told Charles that signing the decree had been the easy part. Camilla had brought her anger into the office. William had arrived carrying suspicion over Catherine and the children. Edward had called with humiliation in his voice, after learning of a cancellation from strangers. She had absorbed every wound, while the king remained removed from the people forced to live beneath his order. Charles did not defend himself. During their private conversation, he admitted that illness, exhaustion, and fear of another family division had made him delay action. His voice faltered when he confessed that he had chosen his sister partly because she could endure resentment he no longer had the strength to carry alone. Anne heard the truth, but she refused to let sympathy become another excuse for silence. Anne moved the leaked email aside and told him she would continue only if he stood openly beside her. No more hidden instructions. No more allowing relatives to believe the new authority belonged to her alone. Charles reached across the table, took his sister's hand, and said, "Then no one will mistake whose decision this was again." The choice changed the entire strategy. Anne proposed one central engagements office, written approval protocols, direct notice to every affected royal, and a ban on restoring cancelled appearances through private channels. An approval protocol meant a clear set of steps every household had to follow before making a public promise. The coordinator would not simply be dismissed. The system that gave him influence would be dismantled. Charles agreed to announce the reforms under his own name and publicly recognize Anne as the person empowered to carry them out. She accepted, but demanded one safeguard. Every family member could appeal a decision directly without punishment. Discipline would remain firm, yet compassion would not disappear. By morning, the palace prepared the announcement, and Charles would stand beside Anne when it was released. The brother had finally stepped beside the sister he had placed in the line of fire, and when their united decision reached the public, Britain would decide whether it saw a royal crisis or a monarchy correcting itself. At 7 the next morning, newspaper bundles struck the pavement outside Victoria Station, with the same 4 words dominating the front pages: "Anne takes royal control." Broadcasters interrupted their schedules, commentators argued over the meaning of the emergency decree, and a crowd began forming beside the railings of Buckingham Palace. Yet one image silenced the loudest speculation: Charles and Anne leaving morning prayers together, walking side by side without visible hesitation. Charles had done what his sister demanded. The palace statement confirmed that Anne would oversee the coordination and approval of official royal engagements under his direct authority. An official engagement was a public duty carried out on behalf of the crown, and the new system meant no household could promise an appearance without central approval. The statement presented the change as a reform built to protect consistency, service, and public confidence. Critics saw a family in disorder. Supporters saw the only royal capable of restoring discipline. Anne's face dominated a front page, displayed at a kiosk opposite the palace. Beneath her photograph ran the headline, "The King's Iron Hand," while a smaller image showed Charles signing a document. The contrast was impossible to ignore. He had issued the order, but she would carry its weight. That distinction turned a scheduling reform into a national argument about loyalty, power, and the future direction of the monarchy. Public feelings shifted near the palace gates. An elderly woman holding flowers faced a live broadcaster and said, "She has done the work for 50 years. Let her organize those who have forgotten what the work is." Her words were replayed throughout the morning. Anne was no longer being discussed only as the king's sister. She had become the symbol of duty without glamour. Camilla watched the coverage privately. Suggestions that Anne had replaced her influence cut deeply, and she remained still as commentators questioned her position. Then the broadcast returned to the unauthorized Royal Gallery invitation. The Queen Consort's expression changed when the presenter explained how her office had reversed Charles's instruction. Publicly, the reform appeared harsh. Privately, she knew exactly why it had happened. Edward's visit to the grieving community transformed the same news cycle. He listened quietly, comforted families, and carried the solemn responsibility Anne had placed in his hands. The Duke now understood that the reassignment had not diminished him. It had trusted him with the duty that mattered more. The palace then announced the senior coordinator's departure and the creation of one central engagements office, ending the network that had traded influence behind closed doors. William issued a concise statement supporting clearer coordination while protecting family welfare. The heirs' cooperation removed the greatest threat to Anne's authority. One meeting still remained. Charles, Anne, and Camilla would now decide whether reform could restore more than the calendar. Britain had delivered its judgment on Anne's authority, but the monarchy's true verdict would be written behind closed doors, where power mattered less than whether three wounded relatives could still face one another honestly. The final meeting began without documents. Charles sat between his wife and his sister, but he made no attempt to hide behind the authority of the crown. Camilla's anger had cooled into sadness. Anne's resolve carried the fatigue of someone who had spent 2 days absorbing everyone else's fear. What followed did not reverse the decree. It did something more important. It forced the three of them to say aloud what silence, loyalty, and pride had concealed. Charles spoke first. Anne's control over royal engagements would remain in force, and the central office would become a permanent part of the monarchy's working structure. A central engagements office meant one team would coordinate and approve official appearances across every household, ending the private competition that had caused the crisis. The emergency had created lasting reform. This was no temporary display of power. Anne answered with equal clarity. She was not replacing Camilla, outranking William, judging Edward, or claiming authority beyond the king's order. Her role covered official scheduling and representation alone, with firm protections for health, family responsibility, and personal dignity. She would control the calendar, not their private lives. Camilla finally faced the truth. During the private conversation, she admitted that restoring the Royal Gallery invitation had been wrong. She had believed she was protecting someone close to her, but fear had guided the decision. The Queen Consort told her husband that she had felt increasingly powerless and had used private influence because asking him directly seemed harder than acting quietly. Charles did not retreat behind rank. He accepted that his avoidance had helped create the conflict. By delaying painful conversations, the monarch had allowed instructions to sound like suggestions and silence to resemble permission. Camilla had crossed a line, but he had left that line blurred. The room changed when the Queen turned toward Anne. She promised that every future engagement from her household would pass through the new office. The Princess Royal did not celebrate or demand an apology. She slid the first revised calendar across the table. Camilla read the approval page, signed it, and returned the pen. That small act ended the rebellion. Consequences followed with surprising balance. Edward embraced the difficult responsibility he had been given, while Sophie received a stronger public role. William secured safeguards protecting Catherine and the children from institutional pressure. Charles regained one clear view of how the crown would be represented across the country. Anne emerged neither as a rival queen nor a substitute monarch. She became the family's enforcer of duty, willing to carry resentment so service could no longer be controlled by ego or private competition. The decree proved that royal survival depended less on grandeur than discipline, accountability, and the courage to correct failure before public trust disappeared. Charles's cry of "enough" had rejected avoidance, not his family. The decision wounded them, but honesty reunited them around duty. And so the decree signed in darkness reached its final meaning in daylight. Anne held the calendar, Charles held the crown, and the royal family finally understood that neither could endure without trust. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.